Hey there, curious minds. Welcome back to Pulse Point, where we delve into the darkest corners of history and uncover the most chilling tales from our past. Today, we're diving into the gruesome and often horrifying world of ancient execution methods. These are not for the faint of heart, but they offer a sobering glimpse into the extremes of human cruelty. Let's journey through some of the worst execution methods in history. 1. Crucifixion. Crucifixion was an ancient method of execution where the victim was tied or nailed to a wooden beam, typically in the shape of a cross. Nails were driven through the bones just below the wrists, causing excruciating pain. The feet were also nailed, and as the victim's legs weakened, their arms bore the body's weight, dislocating the shoulders and extending the arms. This unnatural position led to severe respiratory problems and eventually suffocation. The process of dying could take several hours to even days, depending on the individual's strength and the exact method used. Crucifixion was most notably used during the Roman Empire, particularly from the 6th century BCE to the 4th century CE. 2. Keelhauling. Originating from the Dutch term keelhalen, keelhauling was a brutal punishment for sailors. The victim was tied and weighted, then dragged under the keel of the ship. The rough barnacles and the ship's hull caused severe injuries and lacerations. If drowning didn't claim their life, the subsequent infections from the wounds often did. The survival rate was nearly zero, making this method both tortuous and deadly. Keelhauling was primarily used during the 16th to 18th centuries by European navies, particularly the Dutch and British. 3. Impalement. Famously associated with Vlad the Impaler, this horrific method involved a sharpened stake inserted partway into the victim's body through the rectum or vagina. The victim's own weight gradually forced them further onto the stake, piercing vital organs over several agonizing days. The slow, excruciating nature of death by impalement made it a method designed to instill terror and exert dominance. Victims could suffer for hours or even days before succumbing to their injuries. Impalement was most common in medieval Europe, especially in the 15th century. 4. Roman candle. In this method, victims were tied to stakes and covered in flammable substances like pitch and oil before being set on fire. The flames were ignited from the feet up to prolong suffering. Emperor Nero infamously used this execution method to illuminate his gardens during parties, burning Christians as a grim spectacle. This brutal method left its victims in unimaginable agony as they slowly burned alive. Death could take several hours, depending on how the fire was managed. Roman candle executions were primarily used during the early Roman Empire, particularly in the 1st century CE. 5. Flaying. Flaying involved stripping the victim and binding their hands and feet. The executioner then used a sharp blade to peel away the skin, often starting with the head to maximize pain. Some victims were even boiled to soften the skin. Death could come from shock, blood loss, hypothermia, or infection, and could take anywhere from a few hours to several days, making this one of the most excruciating forms of torture. Flaying was practiced in various cultures, including ancient Assyria and medieval Europe, but it was especially noted in the 9th to 15th centuries. 6. The rack. The rack was a table with axles and levers at both ends. The victim was tied to the table, and the axles were turned to stretch their body. This caused intense pain as joints, muscles, and tendons were strained and eventually torn. The rib cage pressured the lungs, making breathing difficult, and bones shattered under the strain. Some versions of the rack included spiked axles that would strip the skin from the victim's back. Death could occur from the extreme physical trauma or suffocation, and the process could take hours or days. The rack was most famously used during the medieval period and the Spanish Inquisition. 7. The boats, scaphism. In scaphism, the victim was placed between two boats with only their head, hands, and feet exposed. They were force-fed milk and honey, which also coated their exposed body parts. Left in the sun, flies and vermin were attracted to the honey and excrement, leading to severe infections and a slow, agonizing death as insects and animals consumed them alive. Victims could suffer for days or even weeks before dying. Scaphism was used in ancient Persia, particularly during the 5th century BCE. 8. Rat torture. Rat torture involved placing rats inside a cage against the victim's abdomen. The cage was then heated, causing the rats to panic and burrow through the victim's flesh to escape the heat. This method caused unbearable pain and was effective in extracting information from prisoners due to its psychological and physical torment. Death could occur from the internal injuries and infections caused by the rats, often within a few hours to a couple of days. Rat torture was used at various times, including in ancient Rome and during the Elizabethan era. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you next time.